In today's episode, a team of park rangers in India sneak through tall grass to tranquilize an injured elephant to give the elephant life-saving medical attention. As he is struck with the first tranquilizer dart, the elephant erupts in rage, trampling to death one of the men. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying elephant attack on Aane Venkatesh. Welcome to Final Affliction. The jungles that surround Alur, India are a popular tourist destination. It's home to an amazing amount of wildlife that people come from all over the world to see. Tigers, monkeys, elephants, bears, you name it, it's there. The area is normally well maintained, and almost every large animal is accounted for and observed at all times. August had been a busy month for the park. In the past few years, there had been many new baby elephants that came into the world, and those babies had started to grow up into adolescence. The young females kept to the herds, but the teenage bulls were starting to break away from their mothers by forming their own little bachelor groups. Since females go into heat every 4 to 5 months, the juvenile bulls can get a little too excited around that time. The staff at the park were keeping an especially close eye on the younger bulls over the course of August 2023. For the most part, there hadn't been any serious injuries that came from the males fighting against each other. And thus far, they'd only had to tranquilize one young male who was sporting a bad gash on his shoulder. The wound just needed a minor dressing in the field, and the animal was healing up very well. It's usually the younger males who get hurt when they try to scuffle with larger, more experienced bulls. So staff were a little surprised when they received reports that one of their older bulls, a 40-year-old beauty named Beima, was seriously injured after he'd been attacked by 3 other males. The old bull did his duty to protect his herd of almost 40 females and their babies, but 3 against 1 left the senior Indian elephant visibly limping. Beima is a wild specimen, so coaxing him in with food to see just how badly he was injured wasn't an option. Given the severity of his limp, they knew that it could mean a possible broken bone, and that would be a death sentence for the animal. Even if he did manage to suffer along for a few more days, the younger bulls, who were bound to be attracted to the females who were still in heat, would surely kill him. If he was limping, then it was highly likely that he had other injuries too, but trying to observe him from afar, hidden between trees and tall grasses, rangers just couldn't tell what other injuries he might have. Luckily, Aane Venkatesh was still on duty. He'd been working at the park for decades as one of their best sharpshooters. Aane rarely had to dispatch an animal. Mostly he was called in to tranquilize injured animals like Beima so that veterinarians could treat them, and Aane never missed a shot. He'd retired 2 years ago, but the park still called on him as an outside contractor because he was such an accurate shooter that they couldn't get along without him. Besides, Aane wasn't going to let the job slide. Beima was a legend at the place, and he'd seen the elephant grow up in front of his eyes when he started working at the reserve in his 20s. He, 3 other rangers, and a vet traveled out in a jeep to see if they could find Beima. This park is huge, and they fully expected to spend more than a single day looking for him. But that wouldn't be the case. The first herd they found was a bachelor herd, probably the very one that attacked Beima and his ladies. The 5 young bulls stayed close to the tantalizing females, but since Beima had technically won the previous fight, they kept themselves at a safe distance. 2 of the bigger males sported a few scuff marks that were already scabbed over. The vet observed them for a while through his binoculars and deemed them fit to go on their own. Their injuries were enough to hurt their pride, but not serious enough to warrant checking them over. 2 miles away, the herd of 40 or so ladies and their babies were gathered around a watering hole. Beima was circling them from behind, keeping an eye out for the hooligans who'd frightened the girls the day before. The elephants were familiar with the jeeps, but the constant bombardment from the younger males and the extreme fight of the day before still had them spooked. When the vehicle approached, they scattered, and Beima became immediately aggressive. His ears twitched and he trumpeted nervously. He tried to make a show of stomping his feet, but he was in no shape to look formidable. Even from a distance, the Rangers could see that he couldn't put his full weight on his front left leg. Beima was in pain, on high alert, and incredibly frustrated that the Jeep stood between him and his precious herd that were moving into the jungle for cover. Aane and the Rangers got out of the Jeep. It was safer to get nearer to the animal on foot. The Jeep was a massive target that Beima couldn't miss if he charged. Humans, however, are much smaller and would have no trouble hiding in the tall grass that grew up to their shoulders. Beima saw them disembark, and then he lost the 3 men in the grass. He knew they were there. He could hear them shouting commands at each other, and he could taste them in the air. He just couldn't see them. The matriarch was trumpeting in the distance. He needed to get past the humans and their cars and back to the women and children who needed his protection. Aane and the Rangers were moving in. The 3 younger Rangers kept well behind the seasoned professional. They shouted back and forth to keep each other organized so that they could form a loose circle around Beima until Aane could get close enough to shoot him with a sleeping dart. But the closer they got, the louder their shouts became, and Beima went from nervous to becoming a force of pure hysteria. He trampled 2 trees in his wake as he turned in circles, searching for the source of the noise. Aane was now only 20 feet away from him. He'd been crawling close to the earth so that the high grass could hide him, and now that he was close enough, he got up on his knees, aimed and fired, just as the elephant turned his back to where Aane was hidden. The dart flew true, landing right in Beima's rump. Beima flew around. It wasn't the pain of the dart. In fact, he hadn't even felt it strike him at all. It was the sound of Aane's gunfire that alerted him to Aane's position. Beima stormed at the source of the blast, running at full speed. His rage doused the pain in his leg, and he was now fueled by pure wrath. Aane leapt to his feet when the bull charged straight at him, and he ran as fast as his legs could carry him in the other direction. The bushes and trees broke his speed somewhat, and the sound of stomping feet was fast approaching. This wasn't even a race. Beima was going to catch up to him in seconds. His colleagues were screaming in terror, and the wild trumpet of the elephant pounded in Aane's ears. He turned and fired a wild shot over his head. The second dart flew into the jungle, sailing past the fast-approaching Beima by several feet. Then, with the elephant almost on top of him, the ground suddenly disappeared beneath his feet, and Aane went down hard. He'd run straight into a ditch that was 4 feet deep, and he slammed into the ground with a rifle held out in front of him. He spun around on the ground just as the colossal beast reared out of the grass, towering over him. Aane squeezed the trigger one last time, and the red-feathered dart hit Beima on his injured leg, but it was too late. Beima's foot bore down, driving Aane into the grass and sand. Aane could hear the sickening sound of breaking bones as the full weight of a fully grown Indian elephant descended upon him. The crushing weight on his abdomen sent waves of immense pressure to Aane's head and extremities. For a split second, Aane thought his eyeballs were going to shoot out of their sockets, and then the gray body moved over him. His foot hit the earth right next to Aane's head, missing him by just a few inches. The effect of the 2 darts was finally taking hold, and no matter how much anger and fear the animal had for fuel, it was no longer enough to override the narcotic effects of the darts. Beima fled before he could pass out in the midst of the men who were trying to kill him. As his backside disappeared into the jungle, the Rangers ran forward to the place where Aane had fallen. Aane was thrust so deep into the earth that the ground was level with his ears. His eyes were wild with panic and fear, and his breath was hitched and short. Aane made no sound. His chest was crushed so badly that he needed every ounce of his being concentrated on breathing. His colleagues lifted him out of the ditch, but that was Aane's limit. The movement sent a shockwave of pain so immense through him that his brain just simply winked out of consciousness to spare him any more torture. Aane did not regain consciousness during the trip to the hospital. Doctors patched him up as best they could, and from what they could ascertain, Aane's back, several ribs, and his sternum were all shattered. Most of his internal organs were severely damaged. The only thing doctors could do was make him as comfortable as possible until the inevitable end came. Sadly, the end came 2 days later. on the 2nd of September, when Aane breathed his last. And Beima, he collapsed just yards away from the scene. There he lay until the next morning. The Rangers hadn't returned for him since they stayed with Aane until his family could arrive. 12 hours after being shot down with 2 tranquilizers, Beima simply got up, shook himself off, and set out to find his herd. It wasn't until 4 days later that someone spotted him again, still chasing away randy young bulls. Only now there was no sign of a limp anymore. It seems that Beima just had a minor sprain all along, a minor sprain that led Aane Venkatesh to his terrifying final affliction.